In this episode, we focus on a skill that makes governance feel more human and less mechanical. Understanding the people who can shape outcomes long before a project is approved or a policy is written. Beginners often assume that if an initiative is logical and beneficial, it will naturally move forward, but organizations do not run on logic alone. They run on relationships, priorities, fears, habits, and incentives, and those factors can either accelerate progress or quietly block it. Stakeholder analysis is the disciplined way to anticipate how different individuals and groups will react to a change, how much power they have to influence decisions, and what they personally gain or lose. When this work is done early, governance becomes more realistic because it plans for human behavior instead of pretending everyone will agree. When it is skipped, initiatives often stall in confusing ways, with resistance that seems sudden but was actually predictable. The goal here is to learn how stakeholder analysis maps influence, incentives, and resistance so governance can guide decisions and execution with fewer surprises. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at CGEIT.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A stakeholder is anyone who can affect an initiative or be affected by it, and that definition is deliberately broad. Stakeholders include executives, managers, frontline staff, customers, partners, compliance teams, security teams, finance teams, and even vendors, because each can influence what happens or how it is perceived. Stakeholder analysis is not gossip, and it is not manipulation. It is a structured attempt to understand interests and power so decisions are more likely to succeed. Influence is about who can approve, block, delay, or redirect an effort, whether through formal authority or informal credibility. Incentives are about what motivates a stakeholder, such as performance goals, budget ownership, personal reputation, risk tolerance, or workload pressure. Resistance is about why a stakeholder might oppose or avoid the initiative, which can include fear of losing control, fear of added work, fear of exposure, or simple skepticism based on past failures. For beginners, it helps to see that resistance is not always irrational. Sometimes it is a signal that something important has not been addressed. A mature governance approach treats stakeholder analysis as part of risk management, because people-driven risk is often more likely than technology-driven failure. Influence comes in different forms, and understanding those forms early can save a lot of time. Some influence is formal, like a leader who controls budget or who has the authority to approve a policy. Other influence is informal, like a respected engineer whose opinions shape what teams will accept, or a long-tenured manager who knows how to slow things down quietly. Influence can also be structural, meaning it comes from where a group sits in workflows, like a procurement team that controls vendor onboarding or a legal team that controls contract terms. Beginners sometimes focus only on the person with the highest title, but many initiatives fail because a less visible stakeholder was ignored. Mapping influence means identifying who can say yes, who can say no, who can delay, who can shape perception, and who can provide resources. It also means understanding the networks between stakeholders, such as who trusts whom and who tends to follow whose lead. When governance has this map, it can plan engagement and decision timing so approvals happen smoothly rather than through repeated surprises. Incentives are often the hidden engine behind behavior, and they are not always aligned with enterprise goals. A department leader may be measured on speed of delivery, which can make them resist controls that add steps. Another leader may be measured on cost reduction, which can make them resist investments that have long-term value but short-term cost. An operations team may be measured on uptime, which can make them skeptical of changes that introduce instability. Incentives can also be personal, like protecting a team's reputation, avoiding blame, or maintaining control over a domain. Beginners sometimes think incentives are selfishness, but incentives are usually rational responses to what the organization rewards and punishes. Stakeholder analysis makes these motivations visible so governance can frame initiatives in ways that connect to what people care about. For example, a security improvement can be explained not only as risk reduction, but as reducing downtime, improving customer trust, and avoiding costly recovery work that drains teams. When incentives are understood, governance can build coalitions by showing different stakeholders how the initiative supports their goals rather than threatening them. Resistance is often misunderstood, especially by beginners who assume resistance means people are stubborn or anti-progress. Resistance can be active, like open opposition, or passive, like slow responses, missed meetings, or vague objections that never resolve. Resistance can also be structural, such as a process that requires approvals from groups who are overloaded, causing delays that look like resistance. Mapping resistance early means asking what might make this initiative feel risky, costly, or threatening to different stakeholders. Common sources include fear of losing authority, fear of increased workload, fear of job change, fear of failure becoming visible, and fear that the initiative will not deliver and will leave them with a mess. Resistance can also come from fatigue, because organizations often have many initiatives, and people may not trust yet another change. A governance mindset is to treat resistance as data, not as disrespect, because it often points to missing clarity about benefits, impacts, or responsibilities. When governance anticipates resistance, it can address it through design changes, communication, sequencing, and support rather than reacting after delays occur. A practical way to think about stakeholder analysis is to connect influence, incentives, and resistance into a single picture of how an initiative will travel through the organization. The initiative will pass through decision points like funding, prioritization, architecture alignment, and compliance review, and at each point certain stakeholders can accelerate or slow progress. If you know who controls each gate and what they care about, you can plan your approach more effectively. For example, if a finance stakeholder is influential and highly cost-sensitive, you prepare a clear value story and cost justification early rather than hoping it will be accepted later. If a frontline operations group has high influence through their ability to adopt or reject a process, you engage them early to understand workflow impacts and reduce friction. Beginners sometimes think the best approach is to convince everyone with the same argument, but different stakeholders need different framing because their incentives differ. Stakeholder analysis allows governance to tailor messaging and design so the initiative is easier to accept across diverse groups. This is not about creating different truths, but about connecting a consistent initiative to different legitimate perspectives. Stakeholder analysis also helps prevent a common governance failure where decisions are made by a small group, but execution depends on many others who were never meaningfully involved. When those excluded stakeholders later push back, leaders interpret it as unexpected resistance, even though it is predictable. Early mapping encourages inclusive engagement at the right level, meaning not every stakeholder needs to be in every meeting, but key concerns must be surfaced before commitments are made. This is especially important when initiatives affect daily work, because people are more likely to support changes they help shape. Another aspect is identifying champions, who are stakeholders with influence who also see value and can advocate for the initiative. Champions are powerful because they speak the language of their communities and can build trust faster than a central governance team can. Beginners can think of champions as bridges between groups, helping translate intent into practical acceptance. Stakeholder analysis is the tool that helps you identify where those bridges should exist. Another important concept is that stakeholder maps should be dynamic, because influence and incentives can change when leadership changes, when budgets shift, or when incidents occur. A major outage can change incentives quickly, making reliability-focused initiatives suddenly more attractive. A new regulatory deadline can shift influence toward legal and compliance stakeholders. A reorganization can move decision rights and create new informal power centers. This means stakeholder analysis is not a one-time worksheet. It is an ongoing practice of paying attention to the organizational environment. Governance processes can support this by revisiting stakeholder considerations at planning cadence points and before key decision gates. For beginners, it helps to see that governance is partly about understanding the system of people and partly about understanding the system of technology. If you manage only the technology, the people system will still determine whether change happens. Early mapping gives you a baseline, and continuous updating keeps the baseline accurate as conditions shift. Stakeholder analysis can also reduce conflict by making trade-offs explicit and by preventing misunderstandings about intent. Many conflicts happen because stakeholders assume an initiative is trying to take something away, like budget, control, or status, when the real goal is a broader enterprise outcome. By understanding incentives and resistance, governance can preempt those assumptions with clear explanations and design choices that respect legitimate concerns. For example, a centralized data governance approach might be framed as taking control from business units. But if stakeholder analysis reveals that business units fear slower decisions, governance can design stewardship roles and decision timelines to preserve responsiveness. That is a direct example of using stakeholder insight to improve design rather than just communication. Beginners sometimes think communication is the main response to resistance, but design changes are often more effective. When governance uses stakeholder analysis well, it reduces the need for persuasion because the initiative is shaped to fit human realities. The final piece to emphasize is how stakeholder analysis supports accountability, because it clarifies who must be involved, who must approve, and who must adopt. Many initiatives fail because ownership is unclear, and when problems arise, everyone points elsewhere. By mapping influence, governance can ensure decision rights are clear, and by mapping incentives, governance can ensure accountability mechanisms align with what people are measured on. By mapping resistance, governance can plan support and address pain points before adoption fails. For beginners, the key mindset is that people do not resist change because they dislike progress. They resist when the change threatens something important or adds burden without clear benefit. Stakeholder analysis is how governance discovers those points early and responds thoughtfully. That response might involve reframing value, adjusting scope, sequencing changes, or building new support structures. The earlier this is done, the less expensive and less emotional it becomes. As we bring it all together, stakeholder analysis is one of the most practical tools for making governance work in the real world because it treats influence, incentives, and resistance as core inputs, not as afterthoughts. Mapping influence helps you understand where decisions will actually be made and where bottlenecks can form. Mapping incentives helps you explain value in language each stakeholder cares about and align accountability with motivation. Mapping resistance helps you anticipate friction, address legitimate concerns, and design initiatives that people can adopt without feeling trapped or threatened. For new learners, the main takeaway is that governance succeeds when it manages both the technical system and the human system, and the human system is often the deciding factor. Doing stakeholder analysis early is not extra work that slows things down. It is work that prevents late-stage surprises that cause much bigger delays. When you integrate stakeholder analysis into planning and decision gates, you create a smoother path from strategy to execution, with fewer stalled initiatives and more consistent delivery of outcomes.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.